She trusted her with everything. Her marriage, her pain, her future, and in the end, her heart. What Ifeyinwa Chukwu did not know was that the same woman she paid to set her free would one day stand at an altar wearing white, marrying the man Ifeyinwa once called her husband. This is not fiction. This is the story of betrayal wrapped in friendship, of an old vow sworn at a village shrine that refused to stay buried, and of a woman who smiled in every photograph while planning the destruction of another woman's life. Stay with me till the end, because what happened between Ifeyinwa Chukwu, Adiz Nwosu, and Chief Obinna Eze will remind you that the people closest to you are sometimes the ones you should watch the most closely. Ifeyinwa Chukwu was 29 years old when her marriage finally collapsed. 3 years she had given to Obinna Eze, a man she met at her cousin's wedding in Enugu, a man whose quiet confidence had convinced her that she had found someone who would protect her for the rest of her life. Their wedding had not been an ordinary one. It had been sealed the traditional way, at the shrine of Idemili, in front of both families, with the Dibia Okonkwo pouring libation and speaking words that Ifeyinwa did not fully understand at the time, but would come to remember with a chill years later. The old priest had said that whoever broke the covenant between them would lose the heart of their spouse to the very person who freed them from their darkest hour. Ifeyinwa had laughed about it afterward, the way young brides laugh about old traditions they think no longer apply to modern love. She did not know that laughter would come back to haunt her. The marriage did not end quietly. There were arguments about money, about a business Obinna had built that Ifeyinwa believed she had a right to, about a miscarriage that neither of them ever truly recovered from. By the time she decided to file for divorce, Ifeyinwa was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She needed someone sharp, someone who would fight for her without flinching, and that was how she found Adiz Nwosu, a young lawyer whose reputation in the city courts was already growing. Adiz was 28, confident, dressed always like she had somewhere important to be, and from the very first meeting, she made Ifeyinwa feel like she finally had someone in her corner. For months, Adiz fought for her. She built the case. She prepared her for what to expect in court. She sat beside her through every hearing and every delay tactic that Obinna's lawyers threw at them. Ifeyinwa began to see Adiz not just as her lawyer, but as a friend, the kind of friend who shows up when everyone else has gone quiet. She invited her for dinner. She confided in her about things she had never told anyone else, about the nights she cried herself to sleep, about the fear that she would never trust another man again. Adiz listened. Adiz nodded. Adiz said all the right things. And behind that comforting smile, something darker was already beginning to take root, something Ifeyinwa could not have imagined even in her worst nightmares. The day the judge finally granted the settlement, Ifeyinwa felt something inside her exhale for the first time in years. She was free. She turned to thank the woman who had fought so hard to give her that freedom, and she did not notice what I noticed, what the cameras in that courtroom would have caught if anyone had been watching closely enough. Chief Obinna Eze was not looking at his ex-wife as the marriage was dissolved. His eyes were fixed on Adiz Nwosu, and hers, for the briefest moment, did not look away. Nobody in that courtroom knew what that look would become. Nobody knew that within 2 weeks, Obinna would begin calling the law office with questions about a settlement that had already been finalized, questions that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with the woman who answered his calls. Ifeyinwa certainly did not know. She was too busy rebuilding her life, too busy thanking God for the friend who had helped her survive the hardest chapter of her story, to notice that the same friend was quietly opening a new chapter with the man Ifeyinwa had just left behind. Before we go further into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let us go back, because to understand how deep this betrayal ran, you need to understand what happened at that shrine years before any of this began. When Ifeyinwa and Obinna were joined together in front of Dibia Okonkwo, it was not just a wedding. It was a covenant witnessed by ancestors, by elders, by a community that believed certain oaths were not meant to be broken lightly. The old priest had looked directly at Ifeyinwa that day and told her that a covenant sealed at that shrine could not be undone by paperwork alone. She remembered laughing it off with her bridesmaids that evening, joking that city lawyers had never lost a case to village juju. She would not be laughing years later when she learned exactly who had signed the papers that ended her marriage, and exactly who would go on to wear the ring that was once meant for her alone. Adiz Nwosu did not set out to fall in love with her client's husband. At least, that is what she told herself in the beginning. It started, she would later claim, with a single phone call 2 weeks after the case closed, a call about paperwork that could easily have been handled by an assistant. Obinna asked to meet in person instead. Adiz agreed. She told herself it was professional courtesy. She told herself a great many things in those early weeks, the same way people often build elaborate stories to excuse the decisions they have already made in their hearts long before their minds catch up. Ifeyinwa's grandmother, a woman the family called Mama Adora, was the first person to sense that something was wrong, long before there was any concrete reason to suspect it. She had lived through enough seasons to recognize the particular silence that settles over a family when a secret is growing in the dark. When Ifeyinwa mentioned, almost in passing, how grateful she was that her lawyer still checked in on her from time to time, Mama Adora felt something cold pass through her chest. She asked her granddaughter a simple question. She asked whether that lawyer had ever mentioned speaking with Obinna since the case ended. Ifeyinwa laughed at the question, the same easy laugh she had given the Dibia years earlier, and told her grandmother that Adiz would never do such a thing, that Adiz was not that kind of person. Mama Adora did not argue. She simply asked her granddaughter to be careful, and Ifeyinwa, trusting completely, did not think to ask why. For 2 months, the secret grew quietly, fed by stolen dinners and late-night phone calls disguised as legal consultations. Adiz's law partner, a man named Barrister Chukwu, noticed the pattern before anyone else did. He noticed how often Obinna's name appeared on her call log long after the case had been closed and paid for. He raised it with her once, carefully, the way a colleague raises a concern they are not fully certain they have the right to raise. Adiz brushed him off, told him she knew exactly what she was doing, and something in the way she said it told Chukwu that she did not fully believe her own words. He let it go, not because he stopped worrying, but because he did not yet understand how far things had already gone. Ifeyinwa, meanwhile, was rebuilding her life exactly the way a woman is supposed to after a painful divorce. She threw herself into her work. She started attending church again. She allowed herself, slowly, to imagine a future that did not include Obinna, a future where she might one day trust someone new. She had no reason to believe that the person orchestrating that quiet devastation of trust was the very woman she called whenever she needed to feel less alone. That is the particular cruelty of this kind of betrayal, the kind that does not announce itself with slammed doors or shouted accusations, but instead creeps in disguised as concern, as friendship, as the comforting voice on the other end of the phone telling you everything will be fine. Before we continue, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because this story is only just beginning, and what happens next will show you exactly how far 2 people were willing to go to hide the truth from the one woman who trusted them both completely. In the next part of this story, you will hear about the night Ifeyinwa first heard the word engagement attached to Adiz's name, and you will hear what Dibia Okonkwo had to say when he arrived, uninvited, at a celebration that everyone else believed was a happy one. Day afternoon when Ifeyinwa first heard the word engagement attached to Adiz's name, and she did not hear it from Adiz herself. She heard it from a mutual friend, a woman named Ngozi, at a small gathering that was supposed to be nothing more than an ordinary afternoon among old university friends. Ngozi mentioned it casually, the way people mention things they assume everyone already knows, congratulating Ifeyinwa on how wonderful it was that her old lawyer friend had finally found happiness. Ifeyinwa smiled and nodded the way you do when your body is still processing words your mind has not yet caught up to. She asked, carefully, who the lucky man was. Ngozi said the name Obinna as though it meant nothing at all, and for a moment, Ifeyinwa genuinely believed there had been some mistake, some other Obinna, some coincidence of names in a country full of them. But there was no mistake. The room around her seemed to grow very quiet, even though nothing in it had actually changed. She excused herself before anyone could see her face fully break. In the privacy of her car, sitting alone in the parking lot outside a house full of people still laughing and eating small chops, Ifeyinwa allowed herself to cry the way she had not cried since the day her marriage officially ended. It was not simply grief over losing Obinna a second time. because in truth she had made peace with that loss months earlier. What broke something inside her that day was the realization that the woman who held her hand through every hearing, who sat beside her through every humiliating question from opposing counsel, who told her again and again that she deserved better, had spent that entire time quietly falling in love with the man Ifeyinwa was fighting to leave. Every phone call Adiz had ever made to check on her suddenly felt different in Ifeyinwa's memory. Every dinner, every reassuring word, every late-night message that had once felt like friendship now felt like performance. Mama Adora was the first person Ifeyinwa called that evening, not out of any strategic decision, but simply because there was no one else she trusted enough to hear her voice break completely. Her grandmother did not say "I told you so," though she certainly could have. She simply listened, the way elders often do, waiting for the moment when grief would give way to something Ifeyinwa could actually use. When that moment came, Mama Adora reminded her granddaughter of something the old priest had said on her wedding day, words that had felt like nothing more than tradition at the time. Whoever breaks a covenant sealed at that shrine will lose their spouse's heart to the one who frees them from their darkest hour. Ifeyinwa had been freed from her darkest hour in a courtroom by a woman who had sworn to fight only for her. Mama Adora did not claim to fully understand the mechanics of old vows and modern betrayals, but she made it clear that in her lifetime, she had seen this pattern repeat itself more times than she cared to count, and it rarely ended without consequence for everyone involved. Meanwhile, in a part of the city Ifeyinwa had no reason to visit, Adiz Nwosu was preparing for a future she had convinced herself she deserved. She had rehearsed, in the quiet of her own mind, exactly how she would eventually tell Ifeyinwa the truth, imagining a version of the conversation where her old client would somehow understand, where 2 months of silence could be reframed as simple timing rather than deliberate deception. Barrister Chukwu watched this unfold with a growing unease he could not quite name. He had built his career alongside Adiz, had watched her win cases through sheer discipline and preparation, and he could not reconcile the woman he knew with the woman who was now planning a wedding to a man whose divorce she had personally handled. When he finally asked her directly whether Ifeyinwa knew about the engagement, Adiz's silence answered the question more clearly than any words could have.